I am a wealthy heiress who was abducted 18 years ago. When my biological parents found me, I was reviewing my university admission letter. Seeing the name of the university, they instinctively frowned. Despite living such a hard life, you still managed to get into university at just like our Anne. Could it be that you cheated? I slowly looked up. Auntie, did your child cheat on the college entrance exam? I know my current parents are not my biological ones. But I had no idea I was a victim of trafficking, let alone that my true identity is that of a wealthy heiress. That day, I was sitting on the worn-out sofa, happily checking my university admission letter. Suddenly, a well-dressed middle-aged couple burst in, hugging me without a word of explanation. Her voice trembling, she asked, "Are you Bailey?" I turned my gaze to their faces, hesitated for a moment, and nodded. Just then, the woman caught sight of what I was holding in my hand and gasped in surprise. "Oh my goodness! It's an acceptance letter from University A. In such a poor environment, how did you get accepted to the same university as our Anne? Could it have been through cheating?" Hearing this, the man frowned, his eyes filled with disdain. In the next moment, the girl's whiny voice came through. I instinctively looked towards the door. There stood a man and a woman, both looking at the room with disdain. "Brother, it's so dark in here, I'm scared. There are even spiderwebs on the ceiling, how disgusting." The boy lowered his head and softly reassured, "Just wait a bit longer, and we'll go back." The atmosphere immediately fell into silence. Seeing this, the woman quickly introduced, "We are your biological parents, and outside are your older brother and sister." With that, she beckoned for the two to come in. The young woman was unwilling, so the young man had to enter alone. He pursed his lips, his gaze complex as he looked at me. "I am your biological brother, Sebastian. When you were 5, you were kidnapped by the family's nanny and then sold to this family. The nanny was caught and is currently serving time in prison." Compared to my origins, I was more intrigued by the expression on the girl at the door. Especially upon hearing those last words, her face turned completely pale, her lips trembling as her eyes reddened. Sebastian seemed to notice it too, clearing his throat awkwardly before adding, "And is innocent. Although she's the nanny's child, she never knew about this from beginning to end." "That's right, we've raised her for so many years. And is our biological daughter." The woman who had been holding my hand immediately stood up and rushed to the door, tenderly stroking the girl's head. The two nestled affectionately together, a scene so heartwarming it was almost too sweet. Anne's biological mother, out of jealousy toward the wealthy, kidnapped me as a child and sold me to a remote mountainous area. She then sent her own daughter to an orphanage. Colluding with the director, she ensured that the Somerville parents, who came to adopt a child, chose her daughter, allowing her to live a life of luxury from then on. However, truth cannot be hidden forever. The orphanage was investigated for economic issues, exposing many people involved. The nanny, who was also the dean's lover, could not escape either. Somerville's parents, upon learning of the situation, followed the clues and immediately uncovered the truth. This was also why they were able to track them down many years later. The adoptive parents were villagers from the mountains who had little education. They had no idea that buying a child was also a crime. Upon hearing Somerville's parents threatened to call the police and have them imprisoned, their knees immediately gave way, and they knelt to the ground. The Somerville parents did not show any mercy. In the end, it was only after I threatened to harm myself that they agreed not to pursue the matter. That day, under the reluctant and bewildered gazes of my adoptive parents, I stepped into a luxury car and sped away. In the car, Lady wore a displeased expression, even tinged with a hint of frustration. I knew she was unhappy that I had spoken up for my adoptive parents. However, I didn't care, as I didn't have much affection for my biological parents. The reason I agreed to go back with them was just to attend university. My adoptive parents were poor, managing to support me through high school was already a huge effort for them. The cost of 4 years of university would undoubtedly be like a mountain for them. But for Somerville, it was nothing more than a drop in the bucket. I needed to fight for a better future for myself. and, standing nearby, noticed Lady's unhappiness and softly began to comfort her. "Mom, my sister is just young and was deceived by that couple. Those mountain folk are the worst." Upon hearing this, Lady nodded immediately. Then, with a look of guilt, and turned to me, her voice trembling as if on the verge of tears. "Sister, I'm sorry. It's all my fault, causing you to suffer for so many years." After speaking, she covered her face and began to sob. My father and mother quickly rushed to comfort her. Even Sebastian, who was driving, frequently glanced at the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with concern. I couldn't help but click my tongue in annoyance. Her crying made it seem like I, the one who had been abducted, was the one at fault. Unable to hold back, I spoke up to interrupt. And why don't you wait until I get out of the car to cry? You've been crying twice now since we met. Someone who didn't know might think you were the one who was abducted. Should I also squeeze out some tears to keep you company?" And immediately stopped crying and looked at me in disbelief. Sebastian reproached with displeasure, "Bailey, how can you talk like that? And is worried about you too." "Worried about me?" I scoffed lightly. "More like worried that her status as the fake heiress is at risk." With that single sentence, the car immediately fell into silence. Recovering her composure, and burst into tears while frantically trying to explain. Before long, her eyes turned red and swollen. Her parents couldn't bear to see it, shooting me a resentful glare. And as a good child, she would never think that way. "Bailey, apologize to and right now." I glanced at the one who spoke, Sebastian, and ignored him. Turning my head, I looked out the window at the night view. One car after another sped by, with streetlights illuminating the road brightly. Unlike in the mountains, where everything turned dark at night, making one feel lonely and desperate, as if trapped. Only after and had been soothed did my mother speak up sheepishly. "Bailey, we raised and we know her character best. She absolutely didn't mean it that way, don't misunderstand her. As for you, you're filled with so much hostility. In a family like ours, proper upbringing is essential." Father chimed in from the side. "Learn more from and don't disgrace our family." My brother Sebastian frowned, snorted coldly. "As long as she doesn't bully and just find any random teacher to teach her." The displeasure in her tone was practically overflowing. Seeing everyone on her side, and also started pretending to advise me. "Bailey, my sister will definitely help you get rid of your bad habits. Actually, you can't be blamed for this, it's all because of that despicable couple who ruined you." Not a single word mentioned the one who abducted me, her own birth mother, yet all the blame was shifted on to that pair of foster parents. And true intentions are so obvious they can't be hidden. Unfortunately, everyone in Somerville seems to be blind in both eyes and heart. "How about this, when we get back, I'll help you get all dressed up. Mom, Dad, and my brothers have bought me tons of high-end makeup and bags that you probably have never even seen before. Take anything you like, no need to hold back." As soon as she finished speaking, Mom and Dad started praising and for being so considerate. "And really is our good daughter." Seeing this, and only became more smug. "If you have any questions about your studies, you can also ask me. Big sister knows that the educational resources in the mountains are relatively backward, especially." "No need," I interrupted coldly. "It's fine, I've already been accepted into a university. By the way, you probably haven't heard of it, right? It's the best university in the country. By the way, you're the same age as me, so where did you get accepted? You didn't skip the college entrance exam, did you?" And exclaimed in surprise, covering her mouth. Seeing my silence, she began to pretend to comfort me. "Sigh, it's okay. Education doesn't really mean anything, and besides, our family isn't short on money. You could even live off your parents for life without any issues." While my biological parents had hesitant expressions on their faces, I calmly pulled out my admission letter. "Sorry to disappoint, but I also got into University A." And widened her eyes in shock. Especially upon seeing her admitted major, she kept muttering, "Impossible, impossible." This startled her parents terribly, and they kept asking what was wrong with her. And, of course, wouldn't tell them. Because that was a university's flagship program, and the required score was the highest. If you need, I can also tutor you. I waved the admission notice in my hand toward Anne, whose face had turned pale. My mother immediately retorted. No need. Our Annie's grades are excellent, and she's a special talent student. She's much better than someone like you who just studies all day. Studies all day? It seems they still don't understand what it takes to get into that top-tier institution. They actually favor Annie to such a blindly excessive extent. I found it somewhat amusing and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Under the displeased gaze of the entire family, I spoke calmly. If not through education, how could I ever leave the mountains? Getting in is easy, getting out is difficult. All of this is thanks to my sister's biological mother. If not for the paternity test, I'd almost believe Anne is your biological daughter, and I'm the maid's. The inside of the car fell silent. Even Sebastian, who had always disliked me, refrained from arguing for once. My mother quietly let go of Anne's hand. As for Anne, she had already lowered her head, her fists clenched tightly. I scoffed disdainfully. If you don't fight back, others won't stop either, they'll just see you as weak and easy to bully. Better to strike back forcefully and make them fear you. It was already midnight when they returned to her biological parents' home, yet the lights inside were still brightly lit. There was even a nanny waiting at the door. As soon as the nanny, Grace, saw Anne, she immediately beamed and approached her. And, you're back. Was the journey tiring? Hearing this, Anne shook her head and turned to look at me. It wasn't tiring. Bringing my little sister home is more important than anything. Hearing this, my parents smiled with relief. Grace, help bring Bailey's luggage inside, my mother instructed before going in. Only Anne, Grace, and I were left at the door. And handed the bag in her hand to Grace and shrugged. Grace is busy, you'll have to bring in your luggage yourself. Before I could speak, she had already taken Grace inside. I was just about to pull my suitcase in myself when suddenly a hand got there faster than mine and grasped the handle. Turning around, I saw it was Sebastian. He glanced at me expressionlessly. Not going in? Planning to stand here as a door god? The very first thing my biological parents did when they took me home was to change my name. My mother, in particular, was the most enthusiastic about it. You are a daughter of the Somerville family. We've given you a name, Caroline, which perfectly matches Anne's name. Everyone in the family seemed quite pleased with this name, just waiting for my nod of approval. I didn't agree and instead chose a new name for myself. Beatrice, the beloved of Somerville, sounds quite lovely as well. Seeing their silence, I added. If you feel it doesn't match well with Anne's name, she could change her name too. Come to think of it, wasn't she originally called something else, not Anne? Anne's eyes reddened, as if she were about to cry again. My parents stopped hesitating and quickly nodded. All right, if you want to be called Beatrice, then so be it. The name change matter ended with my victory. I knew that and had already begun to see me as a thorn in her side. It was only a matter of time before she started causing trouble. Sure enough, not long after, she began stirring up drama. After changing my name, my biological parents held a belated 18th birthday celebration for me. In fact, it was just to let me recognize their faces, so that I wouldn't embarrass the family when going out in the future. My parents even hired a stylist to dress me up in a very sophisticated manner. The jewelry I wore around my neck was one of my mother's treasured pieces. It was said that Anne had begged for it several times, but my mother never agreed. As expected, I saw full-blown jealousy in her eyes. Since today's spotlight was on me, Mom and Dad took me around for introductions, while Anne quietly followed behind. When our parents announced it was time to mingle freely, Anne immediately linked arms with me. Sister, let me introduce you to some peers our age. Mom and Dad have their friends, we have ours. I was about to refuse when my mom already spoke up. That's right, let your sister take you to broaden your horizons. It's good for you. Seeing Anne's look of concern for me, I knew she was definitely up to no good. But it doesn't matter, I'm no pushover anyway. Following Anne to the outdoor pool, a group of rich young men and women immediately surrounded us. They cheerfully greeted Anne. "Who is this?" a clearly displeased voice rang out from the crowd. Everyone immediately turned their attention to me. "And it's not another one of those penniless relatives popping out of nowhere from your family who we've never even heard of, is it?" Someone recognized me. "She's the daughter who was abducted from the Somervilles, just found and brought back." Upon hearing this, several men and women immediately surrounded me, looking me up and down without pause. "So you're that country bumpkin? Let me warn you, and as the young lady of the Somerville family, you're nothing more than an outsider with a blood connection. Know your place." With that, the red-haired girl gave me a shove. Seeing this, and immediately stepped in front of me, filled with righteous indignation, and said to those people, "Beatrice is my sister, so stop bullying her. I don't care about being a young lady or not. All I want is for my sister to be happy." Her gentle and considerate demeanor immediately won the sympathy of those people, who then stood up for her one after another. "And you're just too kind. These poor people are the worst. When she comes back, she's sure to fight you for everything." "Exactly. You see her as a sister, but she might not see you as one. And if you want to teach her a lesson, just say the word. We'll all help you." Feeling everyone's support, and finally spoke up, albeit slowly, to defend me. "Don't act like this. If you truly consider me a friend, then treat Beatrice well, or I'll be upset." Everyone was instantly overwhelmed by her kindness. One of her admirers even dragged me before and made me kneel, forcing me to promise that I would never take anything from her. I glanced at him and slowly uttered a sentence. "How about you kneel first and beg me to spare you?" Before the bootlicker could react, I kicked him right into the swimming pool. I must say, years of farm work have given me endless brute strength. Everyone panicked instantly, scattering to keep their distance from me. After being pulled out of the pool, the bootlicker angrily rushed over, ready to throw a punch. I calmly took out my phone and turned on the video recording. I kindly reminded them. "Just so happens I've connected to the outside big screen's Bluetooth. Care for a live broadcast, everyone?" The bootlicker immediately stopped in his tracks, glaring at me fiercely. "Oh, right, I forgot to mention, I recorded everything you just said while insulting and threatening me. Your parents have probably heard it by now." The group that had been so arrogant just moments ago immediately turned deathly pale. Then, the adults gradually approached, including my parents and Sebastian. Even more surprisingly, Sebastian walked up to me, pulled me behind him, and took on a protective stance. Seeing this, Anne's face instantly turned pale, biting her lip as she watched the scene in disbelief. This time, Sebastian did not immediately go to comfort her, nor did he even glance her way. Mom and Dad also looked at her with reproachful eyes. Anne panicked and began to explain frantically. By the end, tears were streaming down her face, looking utterly pitiful. "Mom and Dad, Beatrice is my sister. I would never let anyone bully her. If you don't believe me, then I have no choice but to leave here." In the end, my mom's heart softened, and she immediately grabbed her hand. "Don't talk nonsense. This will always be your home. How could you talk about leaving so casually? This has nothing to do with you, so don't worry." My dad nodded in agreement, and then stopped crying and nestled obediently in my mother's arms. Seeing this scene, I couldn't help but find it utterly ironic. Those people were dragged by their own parents to apologize to me. Beatrice, right? My brat was talking nonsense. Don't take it to heart. I'll deal with him when we get back. Exactly, Beatrice, Auntie apologizes to you. My child is so ill-mannered, I'll freeze her bank card when we get home. The others quickly voiced their agreement. I knew they were only showing me respect because of Somerville. Mom and Dad's expressions also lightened considerably, and they began to smooth things over. All right, they're just kids, just joking around. Beatrice, let's just let this go, okay? Sure, I nodded, but an apology is still necessary, right? Of course, those elders immediately spoke up. Come over here, all of you, and say sorry to Anne. Wait a minute, the apology I'm talking about isn't as simple as just saying sorry. Hearing this, everyone turned their gaze toward me. So, how does Beatrice want them to apologize? One of the men asked cautiously. Are they familiar with serving tea and water? After all, they've been underlings for so long. I glanced at and beside me and smiled. Then, under everyone's watchful eyes, the group began serving tea and water. Know when to stop. I waved my hand dismissively. All right, I'm generous. I'll forgive you this time. Watching those people with disgusted looks on their faces, I almost burst out laughing. Since that day, Anne never caused trouble for me again, and she even seemed more sincere than before. Just when I thought she had changed, I never expected she would dig a huge pit for me to fall into. That day, Anne suddenly came to me. Before she even spoke, she knelt before me, her voice full of tears. Beatrice, could you go and beg Mom and Dad to spare that person? Her health is poor, she can't handle being in prison. I heard you had it fairly well in that family, at the very least, they didn't mistreat you much. So could you please be kind enough to forgive my mom? I was almost angered into laughter by her shameless words. I was just about to open my mouth and give her a piece of my mind. And actually ran straight to the window and climbed onto it. Before I could react, a crowd of people rushed in, screaming loudly. And, get down, it's dangerous. Darling, and, don't scare Mommy. Seeing this, what else don't I understand? And is directing and acting in her own play, planning to set me up. Sure enough, seeing that they couldn't persuade her, everyone looked at me with accusing eyes, especially my parents. My mother frowned and asked me. Did you say something to provoke Anne? There hasn't been a moment of peace since you returned. I really regret bringing you back. See, in their hearts, and will always be more important than me, their biological daughter. I let out a sigh and slowly explained. And wants me to offer forgiveness to reduce her mother's sentence. I refused, so she used this method to threaten me. Mom and Dad were taken aback, looking at and with a hint of suspicion. And immediately welled up with tears, sobbing and murmuring. As a daughter, I can do nothing. I feel I have no face to live on in this world. It's understandable that Beatrice is unwilling. I will atone for this sin with my life. After speaking, she turned to face the window. Mom and Dad instantly panicked and, without considering anything else, urged me to give my consent. Anyway, you've been doing fine over there, so let this matter go. Anne's life is more important than anything. My dad nodded as well. And is our daughter now. The fact that she has a biological mother in prison, if that gets out, it won't be good for her, especially since she's about to start college soon. I think we should just let it go. What do you think, Beatrice? Although it was phrased as a question, the tone carried a hint of insistence. I knew there was no use in saying more, so I simply lifted my clothes, revealing the long, ugly scar on my waist. They fell silent at once. Pointing to the scar, I said. Is this what you meant by living just fine? Do you know how many times I've been sold? 4 times. The first time, the woman in that family was mentally ill. She came at me with a sickle, and my clothes were soaked with blood. I was lucky to survive. The second time, it was an old man. He came into my bed in the middle of the night and tried to tear off my clothes. If his wife hadn't heard, you can imagine what would have happened. The third time, that couple beat and kicked me every day. To this day, whenever it rains, the old wounds on my body still ache. It wasn't until the 4th time that I met good adoptive parents, and by then I was already 10 years old. That means for 5 years, I lived a life worse than death. So, what right do you have to ask me to forgive? In the end, my parents fell into an awkward and heavy silence. They stopped trying to persuade me but instead patiently comforted Anne. Finally, and reluctantly climbed down from the windowsill. My parents held her lovingly and warned her never to do anything foolish again. Standing by the side, I felt like a forgotten clown. No one had ever cared from the start. Thus, the farce came to an end. A few days later, my foster mother suddenly called me. My foster father had been taken away by the police because of buying a child. Upon hearing this news, my first suspicion fell on Anne. So I went to confront her. To my surprise, she actually admitted it. Those who sold children have all been caught. Why should those who bought them get away with it? Bailey, if I don't have it easy, you won't either. Seeing how anxious I was, and became even more smug. Her eyes were filled with madness and hatred. The injuries on your body are the best evidence. I've already pinned everything on your foster parents. When the time comes, they'll be locked up for good. Knowing this matter required the involvement of my biological parents to resolve, I immediately grabbed her wrist and pulled her outside. Go find Mom and Dad right now and explain everything clearly. And naturally refused. We struggled and tussled all the way to the staircase entrance. Noticing something, and suddenly flung her entire body backward and fell. Behind me were 2 flights of stairs, with a total of over a dozen steps. Falling down would be no small matter. Instinctively, I reached out my hand to try and pull her back. At that very moment, Anne suddenly smiled at me. In that split second of my stunned hesitation, she tumbled down the stairs. As if I had pushed her down from above. I never expected she would resort to such a method to frame me. The crowd gasped in shock, everyone gathering around. I stumbled down. Just as I was about to speak, my father kicked me directly. My body crashed against a pillar, a dull ache spreading in my chest. Tears flowed uncontrollably, slipping into my mouth, tasting bitter and salty. Then, my mother's panicked voice reached my ears. Oh my God, call 120. My daughter fell down the stairs. In my blurred vision, I saw Mom and Dad choose and without hesitation. Soon, and was taken to the hospital, and the surroundings fell silent. I sat on the ground in a daze, feeling nothing but a chill all over my body. At that moment, Sebastian rushed back in a hurry. Seeing me, he was taken aback. I told him I didn't push and she deliberately fell down herself. Sebastian didn't say a word, just furrowed his brow in silence. After a while, he turned his face away and said awkwardly, "And isn't a bad child, she wouldn't do such a thing. It must have been an accident. I shouldn't have had any expectations of them. After all, in their hearts, and as their daughter and sister." I didn't say anything more and lowered my head. I hadn't originally intended to visit Anne, but thinking about my adoptive father, I still followed Sebastian to the hospital. As soon as I arrived at the door of the ward, a somewhat weak and coquettish voice could be heard. "Mom, I really can't eat any more. Please leave it aside for now." "Dad, I've said it so many times, I'm not in pain anymore." Mom coaxed Anne softly and gently. "Eat a little more. You've broken a bone and need proper nourishment. I've already asked the housekeeper to make some soup, which she'll bring over later. Have some more, be good." I suppressed the bitterness in my heart and forced a smile. Seeing me, my parents' faces instantly froze, their tone displeased. "Sebastian, why did you bring her here? Don't you see how much your sister has been hurt?" My biological father looked at me as if I were an enemy. And my biological mother only glanced at me before turning to comfort the person lying on the bed in a soft voice. "And, don't be afraid. Mom and Dad are here, no one dares to bully you." My dad made me apologize to Anne and promise never to bully her again. Otherwise, leave their home. They'll just act as if they never had a daughter like me. I didn't care either way. After all, school would start in just a few days. This kind of home, I didn't want to stay in anyway. However, before leaving, I must resolve the matter concerning my foster father. I swallowed the words I had originally intended to explain. "I can leave your family, but you must first release my foster father." They seemed unaware of the situation, their faces filled with confusion. After I explained, they gave Anne a somewhat strange look. But in the end, they didn't say anything. They were undoubtedly protecting her. So you pushed him downstairs because of this? My father glared at me fiercely. I didn't understand why he would defend and like this when I was clearly his own flesh and blood. I said no, but he didn't believe me. In their eyes, and was a gentle and kind child who could never do anything to frame me. At this point, and began to put on an act and speak up for me. Dad, I fell down the stairs accidentally. It has nothing to do with my sister. Please don't blame her. Isn't it just a fracture and a concussion? A few days of rest will fix it. Please don't let my situation cause any more trouble between you all. Anne's considerate nature immediately tugged at their heartstrings. My father demanded that I kneel before and apologize. Otherwise, your adoptive father can just stay in prison forever. Without a moment's hesitation, I immediately dropped to my knees. And was finally satisfied. When she was happy, her parents naturally stopped worrying about the matter of my adoptive father. The next day, my adoptive mother called to tell me that my adoptive father was fine. Hearing this, I breathed a sigh of relief. They treated me well, so naturally, I didn't want to bring trouble to them because of myself. Finally, my adoptive mother asked me how I was doing in Somerville. I remained silent for a long time, and so did she on the other end. If you want to come home, we welcome you anytime, as long as you don't mind. Her voice carried a hint of caution, as if afraid I might refuse. All right. Hearing my agreement, she responded with 3 consecutive good on the other end. Hanging up the phone, I saw Sebastian standing at the doorway, looking as though he had something to say but couldn't find the words. I know he's here again to persuade me to give in. I ignored him and continued packing my things. I didn't have many belongings, so it didn't take long to finish packing. I didn't take a single thing from the Somervilles. Are you really so heartless? Willing to abandon even your own parents and brother? Upon hearing Sebastian's words, I smiled. It was clearly them who didn't want me. Sebastian, about Anne, do you believe me or her? Sebastian didn't answer, but I already knew the answer. I shrugged, unmasking his hypocrisy without hesitation. No matter what, the only person you trust is Anne. That's the real reason I chose to leave. Since you already have someone to replace me, you shouldn't come looking for me anymore. Sebastian didn't try to persuade me any further and left in a somewhat embarrassed state. And was still in the hospital, so only the nanny and I were left at home. The nanny had something to attend to at home and asked me if I could prepare dinner first and then reheat it to eat later. When she asked this, she seemed a bit flustered. Seeing that I didn't answer, she quickly added, "If it's not okay, could you please not tell Mom and Dad about this?" Seeing me nod, she instantly let out a sigh of relief. Just as she turned to leave, I spoke up. "Please have Grace prepare dinner a bit earlier. I'm a bit hungry." Grace thanked me and told me that there is surveillance on the staircase side. That day. I actually saw it, but as you know, I'm just an employee, so. Self-preservation is the first choice for most people, and I don't blame her. But I have to admire Anne for being willing to risk her own lifetime and again just to frame me. In the end, I didn't use the surveillance to get justice for myself. And is more suited to stay at Somerville than I am. The next day, Anne returned, just as I was coming downstairs with my luggage. Without the slightest hesitation. They all instinctively shielded Anne behind them, as if fearing I would harm her. Watching their actions, I felt extremely ironic. Dad asked me if I really had decided to leave. Do you really want to give up this good life now? Don't go regretting it later. I looked at him firmly and said word by word, I will never regret it. No, words alone are not enough, and don't say we're being heartless. I'll give you 500,000, and we'll make it clear in black and white that from now on, you and we have no more ties. With that said, Father immediately had someone print out the documents. Sebastian wanted to say something, but Mother stopped him. In the end, as they wished, I signed my name and left Somerville. They kept their word and transferred the 500,000 to me. Considering that my adoptive parents are in poor health and getting older, I transferred half to them and used the other half for my studies. Throughout the 4 years of university, apart from Sebastian, I never contacted anyone from Somerville again. And gave up a university and went to a foreign university, and we never saw each other again. Due to my excellent academic performance, I was granted direct admission and also participated in one of my mentor's research projects. I never expected that one of the investors in this project would actually be Dad. Seeing me, he seemed rather surprised. That evening, Sebastian called to ask if I could come to Mom's birthday party. Mom hasn't been in very good health these past few years, and she also has some regrets. I was just about to refuse when I saw a woman entering the hotel, holding onto Dad's arm. That woman is not Mom. After asking, I found out she's Dad's mistress. I heard she used to be a nanny at the Somervilles. That woman is quite something. A nanny? I suddenly thought of Anne's biological mother. The next day, I called Sebastian back, deciding to attend Mom's birthday party. Sebastian told me that and had returned. I said that since so much time had passed, I didn't mind seeing her. Sebastian didn't say anything more and sent me the time and address. Looking at the information, I decided to give them a surprise. The birthday party was held at a high-end hotel. When my dad saw me arrive, his expression turned somewhat unpleasant. I pretended not to see. After all, his expression would become even worse soon. My mother's 50th birthday party was a momentous occasion, attended by friends, relatives, and business partners from Somerville. And, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, was also dressed grandly. When I appeared in a simple yet impeccably tailored black dress, the entire room fell silent for a moment. Over the years, I've relied on myself to win scholarships, get accepted into graduate school, publish papers in top conferences, and take on several major projects. I've long since stopped worrying about money. This gown was custom-made by an up-and-coming international designer, and it carries far more presence than that tacky designer piece and is wearing. Dad's expression instantly turned grim, and instinctively tightened her grip on her skirt. Didn't you cut ties with the Somerville family? Why are you still here? Anne's group of fair-weather friends started their sarcastic comments again. I smiled slightly, ignored them, and walked straight to the main table. The large screen was originally playing photos of Mom's happy family over the past few decades. I had hacked into the hotel system in advance, I hired a top-tier hacker friend, and I covered the cost. The screen suddenly went black, and then a high-definition surveillance video started playing. It was the exact scene from years ago when Anne deliberately leaned back and fell down the stairs, then smiled at me. Paired with slow motion and annotations, it was so clear that even the malice in her eyes was unmistakably visible. The whole room erupted in uproar. Anne screamed and lunged toward the control panel, yelling, "Turn it off! Turn it off now!" Dad was so furious that he rushed forward, attempting to slap me, but I dodged to the side and avoided it. In one smooth motion, I seized his wrist and twisted it behind his back. Over the years, I had taken women's self-defense classes and studied Brazilian jiu-jitsu, so dealing with a middle-aged man who had let himself go was more than enough. Just as the security guard was about to step in, I calmly spoke, "I suggest you watch this before deciding who to help." Immediately after, the second video began to play. Hotel surveillance screenshots of Dad with that nanny from back then, Anne's birth mother, along with a paternity test report and bank transfer records. I hired a private investigator for 3 years, and the evidence is rock solid, and wasn't a simple case of the nanny making a secret switch. Dad was fully aware, gave his silent consent, and even provided financial support to make it happen, all to legitimize his illegitimate daughter. When Mom saw those intimate photos, she completely broke down, slapping Dad twice right then and there before turning around and giving Anne a hard slap. "You vile pair. You made me waste 18 years doting on a fake." And still wanted to cry with tears like pear blossoms, begging Mom for forgiveness. I sneered coldly and threw the third document onto the table. Over the years, and had used Somerville's money for gambling overseas, buying luxury goods, and keeping young lovers, and all the transaction records were signed by her herself. And loves to pretend to be the kindest, doesn't she? Come on, let everyone calculate exactly how much of Somerville's money you've spent. The guests were more than happy to watch the spectacle, and their discussions filled the air. Several of Somerville's business partners immediately stood up to leave, saying, "Richard, the collaboration will likely need to be reevaluated." Dad was so anxious that sweat broke out on his forehead, wanting to have someone throw me out. I raised my hand to signal, and the hotel manager personally led someone in. I had reserved the venue usage for tonight in advance. Legally, I am the client. Security, listen to me. Anyone who dares to cause trouble tonight will be handed over to the police directly. And completely lost it, lunging at me to scratch me, but I kicked her away, my high heel breaking off as she fell to the ground in a mess. I crouched down, looking down at her from above. "And, aren't you the one who loves acting the most? The scene you played today is enough for a lifetime." Mom was so angry that her heart ached and she was sent to the hospital on the spot. Within a week after the banquet ended, the news spread. Dad was directly charged with child trafficking. Evidence of economic crimes from the past was uncovered, along with embezzling funds to support his mistress. The maid, who was also his mistress, was arrested along with him. Both of them are now facing life in prison. When Mom woke up, she acted swiftly, filing for divorce, dividing the assets, and kicking it out of the house, even forbidding her from using the family surname anymore. Sebastian tried to beg for my forgiveness, but I only replied with one sentence. "Did you ever consider how much it hurt when my own father kicked me at the staircase, back when you chose to believe her?" He never showed up again after that. As for me, I bought the remaining shares of Somerville at a low price after its collapse and sold them to a competitor, making a hefty profit. In my 5th year of work, I became the youngest partner in the industry and purchased an entire floor in a downtown office building as my studio. My adoptive parents were brought by me to the city, where they enjoyed the services of dedicated nannies and nutritionists, living a life even more comfortable than Somerville had in his prime days. On the day of the wedding, I wore a custom-made wedding dress worth $1 million, with my adoptive mother and father seated in the place of honor, smiling so widely their mouths could hardly close. Sebastian stood far outside the church, not daring to enter. He only had someone deliver a congratulatory card. Inside was the money my mother had secretly saved for me over the years, along with the words "I'm sorry." I took the money and threw the greeting card into the trash. From then on, the name Somerville vanished from my world without a trace. As for me, Beatrice, I relied on myself to become a light that everyone admires.